project management showdown, waterfall versus agile. And the red corner, hailing from the traditional school of precise planning and structured stages, is the tried and true titan of task management, waterfall. A methodology that lays it out from the start, ensuring that every detail is predicted and every stage is completed before the next begins. And in the blue corner, from a dynamic world of iterative development and adaptive planning, we have flexible, fast moving champion, Agile. This contender thrives on collaboration and adjustments, sprinting through projects with speed and efficiency. Contending in this epic battle are our very own heavyweights, Steve West, the strategic visionary of Project Insight, whose innovative thinking keeps project managers on their toes, and Diane Buckley-Alwees, who's the CEO of Core Performance Concepts, renowned for turning complex concepts into actionable strategies. While they may appear to be on opposing corners, don't be fooled. Today, we're not just here to champion one methodology over the other. Instead, we're going to reveal how mixing the discipline of water with the flexibility of Agile can create a hybrid strategy power enough to handle any project you throw in the ring. Get ready for an enlightened session where you'll learn not only how to jab with Agile, but block with Waterfall, but really how to dance around the ring using a style and rhythm that meets your business needs. So tighten up your gloves and prepare your questions. Get ready to learn which champion's right for your project. You guys ready to go?
We're ready.
Always ready.
Yes.
Definitely. Let's do it.
Excellent.
All right.
Wonderful.
Well, I don't know about you, but I like boxing. It's a good exercise.
That it is.
It is. It's very good for you. Anyway, so welcome everybody. Hi, Steve. Hi, Matt. How you guys doing today?
We're doing great.
Wonderful.
Awesome. Well, today we're going to kind of spend some more time on Agile and Waterfall and talk a bit about, when is it right? And like we said here, it's like, it just depends. I mean, the correct answer to every project management question, it depends, right? It just depends on the situation, depends on the scenarios you're working with, the type of project you're working with. And so we're going to try to help make that a little bit clearer to you in today's session and help you kind of determine what makes sense for you. I just saw somebody yell Agile.
No, right. I mean, that's the thing that, we've gone through these phases where people get really religious about it almost even. So definitely that's why we're going to talk about it today.
Well, the challenge is, I know a lot of people have gone down the path of moving from a waterfall to an Agile. And to your point, to really get good at it, you got to focus on it. You got to kind of really, see if that pure sense works for you and your organization. And then you figure out what makes the most sense in the long run. So that's kind of what we're going to chat a bit about. And, everything has to start with a history. So how did we get here, right? It's hard to believe that we haven't even been 100 years with computers, let alone
really.
Right?
It really is. When you think of the advancements that have happened in that time, it is mind blowing. I agree, Dan.
Yeah.
Right. I mean,
go ahead.
Yeah, we should be lucky that we can do that because, back when you're in your first slide there, they do it by hand on paper. So
I'm always amazed, like if you ever watch the Apollo 13 movie and stuff like that, it's like how we had like no computing power and compared to today. And even back in the 50s, that's when my dad started working on computers with vacuum tubes and I remember cards. I don't know about everybody remember floppy disks and things like that. But project management has evolved along with that because of the complexity of these technology projects. However, and we're going to talk about that a lot today as well, it's not just about technology. Project management is valuable throughout every industry. And, what do you use when? There is no one size fits all as it relates to the project management discipline. And we've added here, ever since like 2010, now we're seeing, we went to your point, we had all waterfall and we swung the pendulum a lot more to Agile. And now it's kind of coming back into more of a hybrid kind of approach. And that's one of the questions that we had for the audience here today. How many people are working in kind of that hybrid? I don't know if you see any stats on that yet, Matt, but we're definitely curious to understand where people are.
Yeah, just really if you're working, Agile, 100%, of course, we're talking pure form of Agile. I guess there's a lot of iterations and forms, but, Agile, water, or hybrid, please do share.
Yep,
We've
absolutely.
got a few people shouting out Agile at the beginning, so that's kind of.
I saw that.
Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
I saw that. Hopefully that you shout it out because you love it, right?
Exactly.
And I've seen where, organizations that have been maybe not as disciplined in the past, once they really start getting into the methods of Agile, they really like it because it is more defined, more about what I can do in this period of time, and it's a little bit less abstract, which is where we're going to start here today. Is Agile Manifesto and the values of Agile. Talk about individuals and interactions rather than on what's the overall process and all the tools that you're going to use. Working software versus just having comprehensive documentation on saying, I'm documenting what I think the end game's going to be. Instead, we're going to work in those smaller iterations and deliver something that works. Agile is also meant to be a little bit more responsive to change versus following the plan. Although I get upset not upset, but I don't like when plans change too drastically, but we'll talk about that a bit today. And then, one of the other things is the customer collaboration, where you're involving those customers, whether they're internal or external, as early as you can in the process, so that hopefully you're not getting to the end and then you hear from the client saying that's not what I wanted, because that is basically a waste of time if that's the case. But there are challenges with having more customer collaboration in this process.
Well, certainly maintaining scope is probably the biggest challenge there.
Yes. People kind of forget what was said 3 months ago, right? That's always
definitely.
All right, well, let's kind of delve into this and dig in a little deeper about individuals and interactions and what are some of those differences between Agile and Waterfall. And, on the Agile side, the expectation is that it's more self-organizational, meaning you've got your team, you've got a dedicated team, hopefully a co-located team, that's working together on a common goal, which in theory should be more motivating, and moving things forward from that perspective. What's been your perspective, Steve, on how realistic it is to have that level of commitment in Agile programs?
Well, I think that we always talk about I'm in the software industry. We make software, so. And that's where most of this Agile push came from, is developing these technology solutions. And I think that it can be it's not as overwhelming to a dev team to see a 2 or 3 week plan than, a big giant old fashioned 1 year rollout. Right. And I think the other big problem with waterfall for software is that you just don't know what you're really going to be building when you start. Like you're going to build if you're going to build a building, that the planning for a building is so much more
tangible,
lengthy, and like well known what you're going to do. Obviously there are things that you don't know about when you're building a construction project or something like that, but construction tends to be more well planned than a software product. Software product, people just shortcut it, and you get a couple different ideas and then you start building it right away. And
right.
So it's really difficult to have a very accurate projection of what you're going to do beyond a few sprints out when you're not really doing the planning. You're actually doing the planning while you're building the product at the same time. So, that's why Agile works so well for software in the tech, basically. I think.
Well, one other thing that, as part of the Agile, tools that are out there, and when you talk about pulling that team together, is the paired programming. And I've experienced some of it, not a whole lot of it, but that is basically where you have two people working on the same task. And the theory is that if they're working on the same task, you're getting some interaction with each other. You're actually delivering something that probably has less defects because you're getting, two heads are better than one kind of approach. I'd love to know what your experience has been, Steve, and your feelings on that. And, anybody out in the audience, because the flip side of that is it more costly. I don't know what people's experience has been other than my own experience, which it seems to be helpful, but it does add resources to your project because you're pairing people up.
Well, I mean, I think it depends on. We definitely have done that where you have two people together. I think that's also sometimes called extreme programming, where one person is really watching the other and you're watching each other. If somebody's working on a big component in your product for software, sometimes assigning a couple people, two people together to work on the same area. They don't necessarily code the exact same thing, but each person might be responsible for each other's code and the usability of the component. So it's definitely a way to go versus having somebody out on an island on their own making decisions. That's more difficult.
Yeah, it's kind of like those hackathons too, where you get more people together to solve a particular problem, and usually you come up with a lot more ideas and one that might really float to the top. So maybe it's in that kind of vein where if you are doing sprints and you are maybe having some a higher degree of defects, maybe doing some paired programming as part of the process might help you. Because that's the theory in it. I just don't have a whole lot of experience with it, but it makes some sense to me.
I like the accountability that it brings as well, right? That everybody's going to be working, at their optimal because Steve and I are doing it together. So
right. Well, I mean, if you're going to do, if you're doing sprints with a dev team, the sprint isn't just engineers. It should be your testers are part of that process too.
Sure.
Your designers, like everybody's time in those sprints needs to be accountable to getting the job done in the time frame. And now that's where I think sometimes, even though people are doing agile, they seem that sometimes agile means I don't need to finish on time, but it's not really, like we've talked about that before. That, I mean, especially if you're doing work for clients, which is what we've done here, my whole career, and the clients usually have dates. And so, you've got to really, that's where it's like, you can't just be only agile only, because I think sometimes you can let your product and your goals get away from yourself in the process of like, well, we got more sprints and it doesn't matter if I get what I said done. I think that can really be a problem too. So
right. Well, let's kind of stay on that point there too, with regard to what's that working software. To your point about, you still have deadlines, and you still have some time frames that you're working within, which is your sprint, whether it's 2 weeks or 3 weeks or whatever you've chosen as an organization. But the intent from an Agile is having something working software. Again, the reality is that you might have 20 deliverables spelled out for your team in that particular sprint over a 3-week window. Some of them are going to be completed on time. Some of them won't, because that's just the nature of the beast, right? Some of them might be demoable. Some of them won't, because you might have something that is intended not to be demoable because it's such a large issue that you have to break it up over a couple sprints. So how you plan that to get to seeing progress and seeing working software is another uniqueness about Agile, but it's not black and white where everything needs to be demoable.
No, right. I mean, definitely you're going to be your sprint is normally, like, especially like this is what we do, but I think a lot of companies do this, that the sprints are really kind of your release cycle of your software, right? So each sprint represents a build that's going to either go to production, or maybe it's just going to testing or whatever, and you're trying to accomplish everything in there. But what if a new feature you're developing takes more than your 2 week period or your 3 week period for your sprint? Well, you're going to definitely have to break down that task into multiple chunks. And here's, I think, a criticism of Agile, or people hanging their hat on it, is I can't tell you how many people we run across who use Agile, but they don't spend the time considering the effort of the tasks, and there are various different, your first point there is story points is really common, t-shirt size is common, and I personally just like flat out hours,
I'm
because
with
at the end of
you.
the day,
Story points never really
if you don't
sunk in
have
my head.
story
Yeah,
points, you have time,
yeah.
and those other abstractions of get you further and further away from the effort, t-shirt size or story points, efforts, how much time does it take you to get a story point done? And,
Mhm.
I
You know what
can't tell you how many people I've seen do Agile, and they don't even score that. They just have a
Yeah.
list of tasks, right? So one task could be take 100 hours, and another one right next to it takes one. So,
Mhm.
um,
Yeah, I
you
mean,
really gotta figure that out.
yeah, and we've had, pretty much every one of these webinars that we've been doing, we sprinkle in a little artificial intelligence conversation too. And that would be interesting to me, is, taking projects that have been done via story pointing, because that's not my favorite way of doing it either. It's just too abstract for me. It would be interesting to see if AI can kind of see how well we do our story points, if you want to use that kind of approach, or if your company's
Yeah,
committed to that, you know, doing some analysis on what things should be from a story point standpoint. Might be an
yeah,
interesting application of AI in the future. So
definitely.
anyway, but yeah, I mean, I don't think it matters how you do your estimating per se, as long as your organization, is comfortable with it,
Mhm.
and your
Yeah,
client's comfortable with
Uh,
it. Because, to tell your client, well, we have, 450 total story points, doesn't say
yeah.
anything to
well,
them.
I mean, if
They're
you're
asking
gonna,
when it's going to be done.
What's a
yeah,
story point now, please? Could you
yeah.
detail that? Yeah.
Well, I mean, at the end of the day, especially if you're doing software delivery or consulting or any kind of charging out, you end up translating that into hours and dollars anyway. So, but I think for companies that are just purely a software company, and they don't have any, they don't really need to track their actual time, because
Hmm.
you're not going to bill it. You just, the time is the whole 2 weeks full time, right?
Hmm.
Then, yeah, the story points could work, but you got to be mindful of accurately scoring everything. So
Right.
you're still back to, well, relative to this is how big, because story points is like relativity kind of based, like
Mhm.
this is harder than that by this much. But if you don't have a good firm scoring, then you're going to overpromise or underpromise.
Uh,
Correct.
So
Correct.
a, a friend of mine is head of QA actually, and they use t-shirt size, not story points. But he was a
yeah,
few nights ago just telling me how frustrated he was that something wasn't sized right at the original, right? And
well,
now they're
yeah,
here, and he can't do what he needs to do, and the pressures that happen with that. So
yeah.
it
I
Right.
mean,
is
yeah, and the t-shirt
key. Your team's
sizes.
on the same page, right?
Oh,
Yeah.
I get it. Like, and the t-shirt sizes are being that it's so much more abstracted from the effort. Like, relative, a small is how much smaller than a medium, right?
Mhm.
Yep.
So, is it double? And
Right.
by going, it's nice. It's easier to score, but I think if you don't have if you only have so many sizes, you're going to be not as accurate. But I guess the theory behind that is that everything kind of smooths itself out with
Evens it
it.
out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So,
well, and it makes it easier, if we go back just to the whole t-shirt sizing. It makes it easier for people to get their head wrapped around it,
yeah.
because it's like, it's anything with estimating. When you say
Mhm.
it's 5 hours, well, darn well that it's not going to be 5 hours, and it's, maybe it's going to be 5 to 10 hours, and give a range, because it's an
Right.
estimate, right? A
Right.
t-shirt size is it's small, it means it should be relatively easy.
Right.
A big extra large is going to be hard, so it doesn't commit them to an hour, but it
Right.
still needs to translate into something like that,
Yeah.
so I mean, it is difficult, but the t-shirt sizing I prefer earlier on in the effort of the whole project, because people don't know what they don't know yet, right? Let's start with that. Let's start, and maybe we hit all of the small ones first to kind of get our feet wet in the project, or maybe we only do one large one in this particular sprint just to get things going. I mean, it helps early on until you start understanding what it is you're trying to deliver, because it goes to the next value, which is responding to change, because what's going to happen.
Yeah, and I just before we go too far, I do want to say one more thing about the t-shirt sizing, in that the t-shirt sizing can be useful in the very beginning of your project, if you know you have 100 different things to do, and you got to score something really fast.
Right.
You don't have time to really analyze everything. That's where that really can come into play. And then the one other thing that I wanted to mention is in Project Insight, we do have t-shirt sizes, we do have story points, and we do have hours. And in fact, we allow you to even map our t-shirts to story to hours, so that you can, so our tool allows you to use those methodologies if you want to. And still have it translate to hours, because we'll talk later about this, but the hours really helps you with capacity.
Yep. Awesome.
So we'll go back to your slide. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt that, but we're going to finish that off.
It's all good. It's all good. Yeah. So again, when we're talking about the different sizes, we know things are going to change, right? And in theory, Agile allows us to change more frequently with maybe without a lot of the pressure per se. If a particular task or an approach isn't working, isn't getting us to what we're looking to do, you can basically wipe the slate clean the next sprint and start with a different approach, versus the waterfall, where you have a plan and you want to kind of finish the whole plan. You're not really testing it fully till the end. You may go down a path in a waterfall and not see the problem until it's way later in the process. And as most of us know, that if you find defects and have issues later in the process, it's more costly to fix. So the theory here is, if you can do it smaller iterations, and you have to adjust, the financial cost to that project should be less.
Yeah. And one thing I want to talk about a little bit with the sprints, and, if you're in a sprint, try not to change what's in that one sprint, right?
Oh, yeah.
So that, because the idea behind the sprints is to shorten it up, so that, like, if new things come in, a bug comes in that is hot, that you could, if you can do it in the next sprint after that, that'd be better. But we have that case where sometimes things just happen, and we try in our planning here within every sprint, we leave some time for unknowns that are going to come in, like a bug that someone's going to have to spend time on. We block that off. That's where the effort comes in, because if we're going to say, within this 2-week period, if your total capacity is like 400 hours, let's say, and that on average 30 hours of that's disrupted by responding to bugs that are need to be addressed immediately, then you would just leave 30 aside at all times right when you start the sprint. But the whole idea, I think sometimes people say, well, it's Agile, so I'll just change my sprint now. And so at least try to finish your 2-week periods as best you can.
I do like the idea of having that, like a little contingency set of hours set aside within a sprint, because, there's a lot. And another good question for the audience is, the teams that are put together into these Agile projects, what I've seen, because most people are going toward hybrid, those individuals are also still responsible for some bug fixing that may happen. So there's always the possibility that something urgent pops up, and having a little contingency in that sprint is a nice way to approach that, so that you have, and it kind of goes to the capacity planning. One of the nice things about Agile is you are just kind of managing your resources every couple weeks, and not having to think about, resources over a longer period of time. And I remember having to do projects where I had 10% of Matt's time. And when do I schedule 10% of Matt's time, versus having Matt for 100% of the time for 2 weeks, and then he can be off onto his other stuff. So, Agile does allow you to plan a little bit more like that, where you're kind of trying to get somebody 100% of the time for a couple of weeks so that they get their stuff done and then they can move on, versus schedule somebody 10% of the time over the next 3 months. Because that's not going to happen, right?
No.
Capacity planning in theory is a lot easier in an Agile kind of method.
Yeah, definitely.
And then shorter bursts.
Go ahead, Matt.
I just said shorter bursts, right? It's just the idea, the whole. So yeah, of course.
Focus on what we got to deliver, and let's get it done, and have all the right people at the right time to get it done.
Yep.
And then on to the next thing. It's not without its challenges, but that's the intent, that's the theory, and is part of the values. And then customer collaboration. This one I think is really positive in my opinion, where you're getting people in front of the progress earlier in the process so that you're getting feedback. The challenge, as you said, Steve, I'm sorry, gonna get all the wrong words here, about, just scope creep. That is a challenge, because this is where you have to be very specific as to what the goals are of the project, because that doesn't change. And if people are trying to change the deliverables and end up getting to different goals, well, therein lies the problem. And that puts a pressure on the project manager to make sure that, even though you're getting the collaboration, you're getting the ability to change things more easily, you still have to, be delivering to the goals and the objectives of that project.
Yeah, I mean, if that gets back to this idea behind, you're not really, at the end of the day, even though people do Agile, there are bigger picture things beyond, the 2 or 3 or 4 sprints out that you're thinking about that you got to map to and report on. So totally agree with you there.
Yeah. And then the first bullet here, people are probably reading this and saying, why is there a question on this? Requirements not fully collected at SDLC onset. So waterfall is you're expected to get the requirements up front, all the requirements. You're still getting all of your requirements, but it's just for the sprint, so you're not getting away from doing requirements. Yeah. You're just doing it in shorter segments and putting placeholders for any further requirements that have to be developed. You don't have to spend your time doing that today, but you are going to get to it. Yeah. So you will be doing full requirements. It's just going to be, staged in part of your sprints.
Well, and I think that it's going to be best to always plan on having more requirements added onto the list, especially if you're doing Agile processes, for sure. And even in waterfall, of course, that can happen where things are going to get added to your project. So if you plan ahead for that, then well, obviously it depends on the thing. And, I think we're really focusing right now a lot on software, but I do want to discuss as we go, like, when can Agile be applied to things, traditionally waterfall types of projects.
Right. Yeah. Right. Oh. Yeah. And we definitely, we I think we are going to get to that one too. Yeah. I think it's one of the last slides. We're going to.
Well, I can't help myself. See, we're battling it out. I got to get right to it. Mm-hmm. Anyway.
Back down. No.
Break it up, you two. This is a clean fight here.
We need a WWF going on, right? Yeah. Yeah. So it's all good. And we talked about this, many times in our webinars, that, the waterfall process is, these 5 phases: analysis, design, code, test, deploy, over a long period of time. And, and the steps that you have to take are still in the Agile process. You're just doing it in smaller segments. So you do your initial release planning, and each iteration is going to have its own set of analysis, design, code, test, deploy, potentially within each iteration. So you're just doing it multiple times. So, even though there are a lot of differences between Agile and Waterfall, it's not a far stretch. It's just you're doing it in a shorter period of time. And then how quickly can you assess things at the end, doing your retrospective, and adapt for the next sprint so that you're not expanding the Agile project out beyond expectation. That's one of the risks with Agile, in my opinion, is we could end up having way too many iterations to the budget that we anticipated. But they are similar.
Yeah, and this is obviously like these phases are tied back to software. Waterfall projects, when we deal with a lot of clients that have all kinds of different projects, not just software, but doing marketing kinds of things, or going out in the field and working on at some location. So these phases there that you might see if you are in a waterfall, you would have maybe different phases there. But your tasks tend to maybe be sequential, or your tasks have to be like a repeatable process that you go through, but the steps are still sequential. And the beauty of the waterfall is that you may know a lot of what you're going to have to do, and when things change, being able to like adjust one thing and have the whole project plans schedule change and recalculate and get a relatively more accurate picture of when you're going to be done and how much money you're going to actually spend. So there's some benefits to waterfall that Agile just can't really do.
Yeah. Well, and I think you're alluding to it too. There's going to be projects out there. Let's just talk about the trades. Somebody does air conditioning, right? Every installation of an air conditioner is a project, right? But the building that they're in, or the tight little space that they have to stick this air conditioner, or the floor that they have to go on, is going to vary, but the steps will still be the same. It's just you're going to have different scenarios that you're dealing with, different outside factors that you have to adjust. So having and in that particular case, a waterfall's just fine, right? Yeah. You got your planning, you got your execution, you got your testing, and then your sign off with the client. You probably don't need, Agile kind of method, but there are some things that maybe it's a really large HVAC installation, right, where, there's 40 air conditioners you're implementing in a building, so you can do them
varying variety, right? Where everything will be connected together as you build. Yep.
Well, like I live in a 10-story building, and there's eight segments of the building. Maybe you do the first segment, then the second segment, the third segment. Right. You can do kind of an Agile process, not have to do them all before you start testing them, type of thing. So I think that's where you're kind of going with that, Steve, right?
Yeah, I'm just definitely the other thing I'm trying to get to is that if you have a big project like that, you could break down those waterfall tasks into a sprint, or maybe you've got 2 concurrent waterfall projects and one engineering team or one field rep team. And we'll talk a little more about this too as we get into here, that you could have a sprint that covers both of those together for that team.
I can't wait to see that.
So, yeah.
And then just to kind of wrap up on the differences, you can argue it one way or the other, right? Agile is expected to be more value driven versus the plan. So we're trying to deliver working software that the client's happy with early on, not just follow the plan blindly. Agile has more fixed resources because it's expected to be fully 100% dedicated team. Where the waterfall's more where the requirements are fixed, and we're trying to deliver to those fixed set of requirements. In Agile, you're looking at it feature by feature versus looking at the whole, plan of all the resources that you need. We've talked about the iteration and the project plan. This is the one I think is kind of interesting. Being a project manager for many years is, Agile says that we facilitate those sprints and we facilitate getting them done. I think I always did that.
Yeah.
It's
The nuance of the language there.
right. I'm like, well, I know I'm a direct person and I will direct, but I always thought I facilitated pretty well. But I just think it's funny when we use the words. But and then serving the client's needs versus managing the effort per se. Again, same thing. It's an approach to how you want to deliver your projects, and you have to be, in either case, you have to be willing to take feedback and adapt. And, when you're responsible for budgets and you're responsible for resources, that's where the project manager comes into play. It's like, what, are we delivering to the goals of this project? Are we within that budget? Do we have some leeway in that budget to maybe make some iterations and shift things in and out a little bit? Do we have some leeway in the schedule, to do some of that, to kind of tweak things? That's where the project manager comes in to make those decisions, versus just blindly letting an Agile project run forever. We don't want projects to run forever. But what ends up happening is we mostly get to this hybrid approach, which we talked about early. And, Steve, you started talking about it, and I'm really curious to see, how you're doing it with, having multiple waterfall projects at the same time with one Agile project for your developers.
Yeah, I think when Agile first started, the other thing is kind of interesting is there are tools out there that are specific Agile. You're either an Agile tool or your waterfall tool, and I know that like Project Insight, we've designed it to be both, pretty much from not the very beginning, but early. And there are things that when you get to like Jira, for example, is just not good at scheduling at all. But we have clients, and this is why we have a Jira integration too, is that we have clients that your project might be an implementation that has dates and times where people have to be certain places and they got to go be at this facility and that facility. That's waterfall. But your tech team that supports your implementation team is probably matrixed. Like that's our situation, is we have one engineering team for everything that Project Insight does versus trying to break our team down into smaller pieces. Like if you don't have a dedicated set of resources and those resources are spread across multiple different projects, like including their own release schedule, like Project Insight has, where we have our own goals, we have goals of what our customers need to have us do. This one team gets it done. So how do you solve that problem? Well, some of these tools, the sprint is all by project. Well, what we did here with our tool is we made it so that the sprint can span multiple projects, that you can have a sprint that incorporates tasks from various different sources. I'm showing you here, this is the Project Insight interface, that some sprints are involved, that, this is the list of all the sprints. This is what the dev team would see. This is their mini project. But if you go over into one of these sprints, you can see that they're doing stuff from the DevOps project. They're doing stuff from SOC 2, and they've got some holdover stuff from prior years. They got to do some marketing work or sales. These are different project plans that this team is supporting, but they can still have their own percent complete here, and they can still have their own burn down chart. And when they get their work done, all the hours and the effort that are applied to these tasks are sitting in both the waterfall project and in the sprint at the same time. It's not a copy of one. It's not a duplication. It's the same task. And that's what I was saying before, even with a tool like Jira, we have clients that the project managers are doing a big giant plan, multi-million dollars, a big IT or whatever other kinds of things. The executives want to know the capacity and the budget and this and that. And the engineering team are sitting over there with their super reactive tool, Jira, and the PMs have to double enter everything, because they got to put it into their plan and then they got to go tell the devs what to do. So the idea behind this, in Project Insight, you can have the sprint and the waterfall projects coexisting using the exact same data, or some of our clients have Project Insight projects with the program and the portfolio management aspect going on there, but then they'll integrate with a Jira project and we still pull in all that information too. So we have two kinds of approaches to dealing with this. But I think many people out there, dev teams are all using DevOps or Jira or something like that, and they're kind of isolated in their own little world. And then all of their data is trapped, but the executives and the other plans are in something bigger or some other project plan that they need to incorporate. And you end up putting data into two different systems. So the idea behind this is to try to avoid that and be more streamlined, but allow a sprint to cover many different projects, allow the dev team to manage themselves and their own goal.
Yeah, I can see this a lot with like product, like, similar to like product development. I mean,
For sure.
an organization that is a very strong product organization, to extend the life of products, you're constantly, innovating and doing new things and new initiatives to kind of, extend the life of those products. Your dev team or the teams that, support those products don't necessarily know when one product starts and then the next innovative one ends, or the next one ends and the next one starts. They're just continuing to enhance that product, and at some point the executives are saying, all right, this is when we say we draw the line, and this is the next one we're delivering. And that that doesn't have to be software, to your point, Steve. That could be Johnson and Johnson, for all we know, right? On how they evolve their products, and they're testing different things.
It can also be field service representatives. This is the work. These are the projects that we have slated for the next 3 weeks. Here they are up top. Here's the tasks down below. Now, how do we want to divvy these up over that period, right? Over the next.
And it certainly helps you prioritize. I mean, here's the other aspect is if maybe you don't have enough resources to accomplish all of the parallel projects at once.
Exactly.
And then this can help you avoid overcommitting on all your projects, because this project managers can get into a committee meeting or a steering meeting with the development team or let's say it's an engineering team, or it could be a life scientist team that the lab or something. They only have so much time and effort, and there's all these different projects competing for their time. What happens if you don't do something like this is each project manager is going to overestimate what they're able to get done, and everything's late.
Yep.
If you plan out in the sprints and say, okay, well, these are the tasks that the scientists need to do, or these are the tasks that the software need to do. Here's all the other tasks. By putting them in the sprints ahead of time, because the capacity of your engineering team is a certain number of hours. In this case, it's 400 hours on the screen I'm showing you here. Then you can start saying, okay, well, these are high. You can see there's priorities there. These are the high ones. So we're going to get the high ones in. And then that helps you be like kind of a gatekeeper between the competing
and you
waterfall projects that you're trying to
in all of the projects. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And to your point, as long as you're prioritizing things, then you want to make sure you're getting the highest things done to make everything continue forward.
Right. And what our tool does is when those tasks go into the sprints, and the sprints are planned out with their set times that we're going to do the sprint, because it's a cadence. The tasks will automatically recalculate the dates based on what sprint you end up throwing them into, and then the rest of your waterfall project will be calculated from any tasks that are subsequent to things that the engineers might have to do. So the idea behind this is that you'll actually get a better understanding of where you'll be by allowing the project team, the matrixed team, to have their own mini project that incorporates the things that they need to do to help service everybody else on the outside. So I feel like the thing to look for to see, could Agile work for me? Let's say you're not a software company. Could Agile work for me in my process? I think a real good indicator of that is if you have a limited team that is matrixed across all of your different things you're trying to do. That might be a signal that Agile could be an additional thing that, you might be great at project management and doing your traditional waterfalls and everything else like this, this is kind of a new concept for non-software people, but some non, I should say. If you have a matrix team with a limited set of resources that are always under a lot of pressure, and they're needed by all your different projects and all your different project management team, that might be a signal that you should look into adding Agile to your processes.
To those critical resources, or those limited resources. Yeah.
Correct.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Awesome. Well, great. All right. Well, we're kind of rolling on here, but to your point, we were just talking about things that might be good opportunities that you might not have thought about to be an Agile project. But on the flip side, you might want to not consider Agile in certain situations, especially if you have very specific, like legal or regulatory requirements that need to be done at a particular time.
Yep.
If you've got very specific contract specifications or limitations or constraints that you need to work within for your client, because the bottom line thing is the Agile approach allows for more iterations and more opportunity to readjust. So if you've got very specific things, there's probably no reason to have an Agile kind of approach. You deliver to that requirement, you deliver to that regulation. It's well spelled out, and there's no need for any kind of gray area. Just deliver to that and you're good. The other one is if there's very strong project closeout requirements to finish. Let's just say building a skyscraper, right? Any kind of building a house.
Yep.
You want that finished, otherwise you can't sell it. People can't move in. It's got to be finished. So those are probably more about a waterfall approach than it is about an Agile approach. So you can see where there's different reasons to use one versus the other.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we have many clients out there that do waterfall only, and opening facilities that have 1,000 different steps that have to be done on a certain timetable because you've committed to bringing in outside contractors at certain times and certain phases. You maybe have to hit a deadline. Yeah, you obtain the building at a certain date. You start having to pay the rent on that building. So those are things where you don't really want to be you don't really want to be like, well, whatever, like it's, especially if it costs a lot of money. We have clients that have to make do services that have deadlines that have to be filed with government agencies on specific dates. But anyway, so there are those situations come up. People have those kinds of projects.
Right. Yeah. And so what is the best thing for you and your organization? So hopefully today we've given you a lot of ideas, a lot of thoughts with regard to when you should use Agile, when you could use Agile, when you should use Waterfall, when you could use Waterfall. And every organization is going to be different, and I even say within, like Steve, you were talking about, you don't have to have every single project go one way or the other. It's probably better to determine the approach on a project by project basis, where a grouping of projects, these go this way and a grouping of projects go this way. If you are in a case where you are doing primarily Waterfall and you're thinking about moving to an Agile, just remember that this is a cultural change. It doesn't happen overnight. The organization that I've been with this one organization for quite a few years, and they started really going towards Agile maybe about 6 years ago, but it was a commitment. And and they're going through another iteration right now of refining what they're doing and trying to get better at it. So it is a commitment, and you've got to be willing to kind of make change. It's not like you say, oh, well, we're going to Agile tomorrow and everybody follow this rule book. It doesn't happen that way.
Everybody's attending. They're not all attending stand-ups the next day and doing what they need to.
And guess what? The clients aren't really bought into it yet. So, that's another one. So it does take time, and it is a process that your organization needs to go through, because it's not just about the project managers, it's not just about the developers or the people on the project team. It's everybody. It's sales, it's marketing, it's product development, it's executive team, it's finance. Everything impacts it, because pretty much everything we do is a project in organizations today, right? So it make sure you're not overcommitting the benefits of Agile from the get-go. It is a process.
Well, and I think the other thing that's kind of dangerous is that sometimes, like I said, we've seen many organizations that maybe they're using an Agile tool, and then there's no effort, no scoring, no effort, just the list of the things. Just because you're doing Agile and you're allowing yourself to change more frequently doesn't mean that you shouldn't be mindful of how hard are the things in the backlog.
Mm-hmm.
Having those scored accurately is going to help you plan, because how many times do people have Agile project where they don't actually get all the tasks done, and then
Right.
now you have the release, and the release is going out no matter what.
Our first time in doing sprints, people kept wanting to insert tasks on the fly.
Yeah.
That was the biggest change that they had, is like they kept wanting, because the client needs it tomorrow. We need to put it in there now.
But that's why you put the placeholder into your, you plan on having bug fixes, or you plan on having extra meetings that when it's funny. I mean, sprints are still the same old everything. You're still really you're just shortening your project. If you think about it, you're taking the bigger picture is, hey, you're going to build some brand new great product, right? And you're going to make a build or do a release or a presentation or whatever you're going to do every 3 weeks or 2 weeks or whatever your set period is. You're at least planning for those 3 weeks, and hopefully you're planning for a couple sprints out, and having the same disciplines that you would with regular traditional waterfall style project. The only difference is that everybody knows that it's going to be more fluid.
Well, but you brought up the point about the whole contingency plan within a sprint.
Yeah.
But I'm going to caution people on something too. Our issue was more of a discipline issue, where we were so used to inserting every bug fix in that we had to stop and say, you know what? No, we have to tell the client, we'll put that into the next sprint. So there was an absolute psychological change. We wanted to deliver that to the client, but it wasn't necessarily necessary to deliver it right then.
Yeah, well, I mean, especially if it's a low
habits, there's a lot of habits to break.
Yeah, what you're talking about too, it gets back to, you need to score, your tickets, your inbound tickets need to be scored as to what their priority are, because sometimes a bug is critical and sometimes it's not. But if you don't want to take a non-critical bug, rip a engineer off of what they're doing to fix that one bug, and then not achieve your sprint goal.
Exactly. So everything has to come with caution.
Yep. That's why you don't want that sales guy driving it based on the customer who called me with fire issues that, may not be big picture. Yeah, no, don't let me prioritize the sprint. I go to say what I need, and that's it, right? That would be it. So absolutely.
If it's sales, it's last in, first out, right?
Whatever closes the deal. That's what we need. Whatever closes the deal. There you go.